I'm just going about admitting everyone. I wanted to put a waiting room on this just in case we got Zoom bombed or anything of the sort. And I'm going ahead and unmuting all of the justices who are logging in, so thank you very much. It's interesting, I'm recognizing unfamiliar faces because these are people who normally aren't in my class. So as everyone logs in, I just wanted to thank the justices for joining my class today. So this is our Civil Rights and Liberties class at UTEP. It is generally had traditionally been a case law based approach with a Socratic method aspect to it, but as you can see, we've sort of transitioned a bit to a different format. And it's been going so well. We've been running it for about 2 weeks at this point. So I'd like to thank Justice Jane Bland, Justice Brett Busby, and Justice Jeffrey Boyd for taking time out of their exceedingly busy schedules to join us here today for sort of an informal question and answer. So thank you, justices, for taking the time to join my class.
Glad to be with you.
So
glad to be here.
Where are you all joining us from today? It looks like the three of you are at home right now.
Looks
I'm
like
at
Justice
home.
Busby's at his office. Justice Busby, it looks like you're in your chambers there.
Yes, yeah, I'm in chambers in Austin. I think Justice Bland and Justice Boyd are at home.
That's right.
I'm going to let my students sort of trickle in, and I'm just going to sort of ask some generalized questions while everyone gets in. So I'm frankly very curious, how did your first remote oral arguments actually go yesterday?
Well, I'll defer to our senior judge on the panel.
Oh no, I'll defer back to you. You go ahead and answer that one, Justice Bland.
Well, from our perspective, they went really well. We were delighted to be able to go ahead and proceed with arguments. And two of the really excellent advocates yesterday were from El Paso, who we had planned to hear in El Paso at your wonderful university. And of course, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, and this one did. So I was really happy to see just how well the advocates adjusted to the different format, and how once we started talking about the issues that are presented in the case, everybody sort of lost track of the Zoom and the new format and just kind of got to the meat of the coconut. I would say we did really well in the first two arguments. The third argument, we had some of the technical hiccups we were afraid that we might have, but we got through them. And, you know, maybe we got a little too cocky that the first two went so well, but that was my perspective. I don't know what my colleagues, we haven't had a chance really to talk since yesterday about this. We've been communicating about other things.
Brett, do you want to add thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I agree with Justice Bland. I thought it went pretty smoothly aside from the technical difficulties in the third one. And I think that may have just been due to broadband, connective, bandwidth on counsel's end, unfortunately, in that particular case. But it went pretty well. I'm sorry that we weren't able to be there in person to hear the case with you in El Paso, but we hope to come back another time. And I'm delighted that we could at least meet with this class virtually. To be able to do that. But as an appellate advocate who argued a lot of cases in front of the court before I became a judge, I think it would have been, it's definitely different than I've ever seen it or experienced it on either side of the bench. But we were trying to help the lawyers by doing some things we don't normally do during oral argument, like saying the lawyer's name before we start asking a question to get their attention, so they know who's speaking and know to stop talking so that we can ask our question. And I think some of those things were really helpful in helping everybody kind of communicate well and make the most out of the time.
I wonder if any of you watched it. Did anyone actually watch any of the arguments from yesterday?
Did any of the students watch? Go ahead and reply in chat, because I have the students muted right now so that we don't have a lot of background noise going on.
Yeah, I didn't see anyone raise a hand or post one of those little emoji hands up there, but yeah, I thought it went a whole lot better than it might have. If you saw any pictures of it, our administrative staff had actually created a backdrop or a background, a Zoom background, that was a photo of the Supreme Court bench. So all 9 of us were uniform in the sense that we had this matching background of the Supreme Court bench behind us. They thought of, oh yeah, here, Justice Busby's just now added it to his background there. Little inside baseball, I couldn't get it to work on mine because my Mac Air is 5 years old and doesn't have the processor capacity to use the background. So I had to use my wife's computer to join yesterday. But they actually had created similar pictures as if you were looking from the bench into the courtroom where you're looking at the lawyer arguing. But they didn't actually organize a way to make that available to the advocates. I kind of wish they had now that I've seen them, because it really kind of created the appearance as if they were standing in the courtroom. So as a result, we had, I think we had one of the 6 lawyers was actually standing up. Mr. Wright was in front of a door and it looked like he was standing up. The others were sitting down, which is very unusual, but of course we said no problem. They were each sitting at a desk or something. And yeah, I thought it went really smooth. And I agree, the third one was a little choppier and some of that was broadband. And I think one of the lawyers was a little less comfortable with that, doing it by video, but I'm not sure she had ever argued before us anyway. So that may have been her very first argument to the Supreme Court and had to do it by video. So kudos to her, because she did a good job. She was just a little less comfortable getting going, I think. But yeah, it was good. And we've seen on social media a lot of conversation about it. As far as I know, we were the first high court in the nation to use that approach. And but I understand that the others are watching and thinking about it. And so we may see a lot of others. Maybe, I don't know, Justice Busby, you clerked at the U.S. Supreme Court. What's the chances they'll decide to do that instead of canceling all their arguments?
Well, we'll see. I think they're going to watch and see how the experiment goes, but they're pretty set on doing it in person, and they don't even televise their, or broadcast their sessions at all right now, which we've been doing for many years. Even when we have it live in the courtroom, you can watch it live stream, or you can go and watch a recording of it later. So we're very proud of the transparency that our court has. And the U.S. Supreme Court has been making some strides. They've been making transcripts available earlier than they used to, sometimes on the same day, but they don't have video in the courtroom. So whether they'll get all the way to Zoom because of the current crisis, I think still remains to be seen. There are a couple of other state high courts that are going to either have or are going to give this a shot. And so I think it provides some good examples of how it can work well. So hopefully they won't watch the third argument from yesterday and think, oh, well, if, we want it to be perfect. And, but we all, as Justice Boyd said, we got through it, and I think everybody was able to make their point. So it worked well from our perspective.
Yeah, I actually observed, because my primary area of research is actually state high courts. That's where I work. That's my work. And colleagues and I are collecting data on how state high courts are actually responding to COVID. And you all are definitely the first court to have oral arguments through Zoom. I know Michigan, I talked with Justice McCormick last week. They're planning on moving forward, I think, next week and holding remote oral arguments. And I know North Dakota is actually thinking about moving forward. They actually did a test run 2 weeks ago. They were the first court to put it out online. So I think watching all be the front runners has actually been very interesting to see. And that's sort of segues into my next question. And this is more so you can provide some illustration to my students. Why is it exceedingly important that courts continue to do work during this time? Not just state high courts, but courts in general.
I'll take a first stab at that one. I don't know if, I want to make sure I unmuted myself. One of the things that the 9 of us on our court enjoy is that in addition to deciding cases that come before us, we also are assigned these liaison assignments to various agencies and commissions and the state bar or task force of all different kinds of assignments. And since I joined the court several years ago, one of mine has been to head up a judicial task force on emergency preparedness, the whole purpose of which is to help ensure that there's a plan in place when an emergency arises, so that we're in a position as a judicial system to continue doing what we have to do despite the emergency. So this all started after Katrina, 2005. And then I guess we had other hurricanes, and then we had the Ebola. And so all of that is intended to make sure that the system knows how to keep operating when there's something. So if, for example, you've been arrested and need to have your quick day in court so that you can get out or whatever the next step will be, you can't sit there in jail for 6 months while we deal with the fact that, the courthouse got destroyed by a hurricane. There has to be some way to hear your situation. We see a lot of that when it comes to family law matters. So if there's a domestic violence problem and a spouse or partner needs to get a temporary restraining order, we can't wait 3 months for coronavirus to go away before the judicial system can address that. And so there's been a lot of work done preparing for this, which has enabled us to be in a position to issue, today was the 11th emergency order that we've issued as a court, that relax rules, suspend deadlines, do other things to make sure that the system is accommodating whatever the needs are. Now, there's a lot of things in, for example, the trial courts and courts of appeals both, that they're not urgent. We don't have to get them resolved in the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. And so the courts are able to prioritize and deal with that. But for those things that are urgent, so for example, if somebody's lost their job and is not able to pay their rent on April 1st, can the landlord come in and evict them right now? Well, it's kind of hard to obey stay-at-home rules when you don't have a home to stay at anymore. And so one of our emergency orders was to postpone all eviction cases for a period of time until we get through this emergency. So yeah, there's a whole lot of that kind of preparation and flexibility that has to go on, while at the same time upholding the rule of law and not allowing, anarchy to control. And so that's kind of the fine balance we try to apply to this.
So what I'm going to try to do, and thank you, Justice Boyd. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to let the students know that their question is up, and I'm going to selectively unmute them and allow them to ask their own questions, so it's not just filtered entirely through me. So this is my cue to the students. I'm going to be calling on you now, so be ready. And I think the first question I'm going to give is to Jennifer Gallardo. So let me go ahead and unmute you. There you are. Hello, Jennifer.
Oh, good afternoon. And this is just, it's great because it kind of touches up on where my question is leading into, and this one's specifically for Justice Bland. As the court's liaison to the Judicial Commission on Mental Health, how is the court ready to improve the interaction with the administration for families and those needs during these hard times?
So that's a great follow-up to Justice Boyd's question. The Judicial Commission on Mental Health is one of several commissions that the court leads in connection with examining the challenges facing people as they interact with the judicial system, the justice system, and working towards solutions. So Judicial Commission on Mental Health is one. The Texas Children's Commission is another that focuses on the needs of children in our state. And then finally, the Texas Access to Justice Commission, which has the Justice Busby is leading, along with Justice Guzman. And that commission, Justice Busby can talk more about, but it is the overarching responsibility of looking for ways to provide civil legal services to those who need them, because there are many Texans that can't afford access to the courts, and how to handle that, whether it's through legal aid, through asking lawyers to be involved. The Mental Health Commission has been convening all through this COVID crisis, and by convening I mean Justice Harriet O'Neill used to say that one of the unsung powers of a Texas Supreme Court justice is the power to convene, which means get a group of stakeholders together to address the challenges that are facing the judicial system. And in connection with mental health, it affects all parts of the justice system. So we partner with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the high criminal court in Texas, as probably a lot of you know. And we have a group of stakeholders that everything from mental health professionals, mental health advocates, disability rights advocates, representatives from our Texas jails and prison system, because obviously the intersection between mental health and our jails is an important one. They're often, sadly, the people that are on the front lines in addressing mental health challenges. And so if you go to the Mental Health Commission website, you can see the work that's being done in connection with COVID. And having our specialty courts like mental health courts be able to continue to hold hearings. And we were on a call just this week sharing information and collaborating on ways to address kind of the monumental challenges that are presented, all across our society, not just the court system, but really every system that makes our country go. It's being confronted with really significant challenges. So what we do is get people together and say, oh, did you know, here's a form order that I used last week to do a remote video conference in this case, to check in with people who are getting services that I'm overseeing, for example. We got reports from around the state about problems, and the Supreme Court listens to those challenges that people are facing on a local level, and we ask ourselves, is this something that that's statewide, potentially in need of a solution? And we've had pretty good luck, convening stakeholders to work together to propose solutions. So in connection with the eviction cases that Justice Boyd mentioned, we wanted to look at putting off evictions and residential foreclosures. But before you do that, you need to look at it, the problem from all sides, and have people that represent tenants and landlords and anybody else who might be a potential stakeholder in that part of the court system, and get them to get together and say, okay, now if in a perfect world, what would you do to remove obstacles that COVID is causing to the administration of justice? And we've had really good luck with that in connection with various challenges that we've been facing statewide. So I'll turn it over to Justice Busby, who I know can talk about more specific things that, because a lot of this is coming through the Access to Justice Commission.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sure. Well, and thank you for the question. And Justice Bland has covered a lot of this. Most of what we've been doing through the Access to Justice Commission has been identifying areas of need, as she was saying, and one that came to our attention very early through the Access to Justice effort was the residential evictions that Justice Boyd spoke about. We also issued an order, I think this morning, on delaying garnishments of debts, collection of debts during this period, when if people are getting in, stimulus money from, individually from the federal government that's coming in to help them with, extraordinary needs that they have through unemployment or health challenges or whatever during this time. We got the leaders of the debtor bar and the creditor bar together to come up with a solution and say, we're going to pause those for right now so that people have those resources to devote to immediate needs. So that's another example of an initiative that's come through the Access to Justice Commission. And what we do more generally, even in times when that are not extraordinary like this, is we're looking for ways both to provide more to make it easier for people who don't have a lawyer to access the court system and get their business done there, whether it's forms for simple kinds of cases that people can fill out, or letting judges know, because as judges, we're not supposed to give legal advice, but if we have a lot of people coming into the courtroom who aren't familiar with the system, or their forms or instructions or things that we can provide to help people understand what they need to do to get their business done in the court system. And also, we're trying to encourage more lawyers to take on cases for free. We call that pro bono, and it's a professional obligation that all of us have to help out people who can't afford a lawyer. And so we're encouraging and making it easier for people to volunteer to take on those cases. And then also we work nationally. Justice Guzman and I are sending a letter today to Senator Cornyn to ask for his help with funding for the Legal Services Corporation, which helps fund a lot of these lawyers for people. It's called civil legal aid all around the country for people who are having legal challenges and can't afford a lawyer. And some of them are extremely serious situations and life-threatening situations, unfortunately involving domestic violence, which sadly has been on the rise during this time. And so it's vital that we have that funding there so that there are lawyers to help people when those situations come up. And unfortunately, because of the economic climate, the funding for those sources is being challenged because it's traditionally come from something called interest on lawyers' trust accounts. And so lawyers are required to keep money for their clients, and the interest on that money usually helps go to pay for legal aid programs. But interest rates just went to zero. So while the level of need is going up because of the current crisis, the level of funding is going down. And so we did get an initial appropriation thanks to Senator Cornyn's help and some of our other folks in the Congress in Washington. They appropriated some money under the First Relief Act to help with civil legal aid, and we're asking for an additional appropriation to help out with those needs. So that's another example of some of the things that the court's doing to help in the current climate.
Thank you. So Pedro, I think I'm going to unmute you now, and I'll let you take a shot at this.
So I want to say hi to all the justices. I know Justice Boyd in particular.
Hi.
My question for you all today is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic changed the way governments exercise their authority on a local, state, and federal level during emergencies? And sort of a second part to that question would be, what role does the judicial system in America, and more relevantly in Texas, play in making sure the government doesn't overstep, but effectively protects the health of the public?
Well, I kind of, thanks, Pedro. And I saw as soon as you popped up when we started this, I said, well, there's somebody I know right there. And I'm not surprised to see you've got the American flag prominently displayed behind you. I'm glad to see you.
Thank you, sir.
You know, I kind of alluded to that issue. Thanks for the question. And that's kind of what I alluded to earlier. So I don't want to say too much. I'll let my colleagues add on to what I said before, but it's a balance that we're trying to achieve here. On the one hand, look, the law says you can't do X. On the other hand, how do you deal with that? Well, say, for example, evictions. That's a good example to come up. Under the law and your contract, your lease agreement, which the law honors the freedom of contract and the responsibilities for a contract. If you haven't paid your rent, the landlord gets to evict you. That's the rule of law. But here we are in the middle of a stay-at-home. How can we balance that? I mean, and that's a tough balance in all these areas that we're dealing with: statutes of limitations and statutes of repose, and just so many different notary publics. You know, if you want to get something notarized under the law, it has to be in person. But now we've got this social distancing. You're not supposed to be meeting with people in person. And I think, did the governor just issue an order today, I think, that granted an exception to that law that now allows for notarization remotely. So it sounds like, well, there's no more law. No, there is law. The law is that, consistent with our constitutional and statutory structures, the governor has power to grant exceptions and to declare an emergency that is going to trigger certain exceptions. The legislature has passed statutes that authorize, for example, our court to grant certain exceptions and postpone certain deadlines. So it's all within the law, but we're having to be really flexible how we do it. And that's the challenge. So I'm going to stop and see if Justice Busby or Justice Bland want to add to that some, because I alluded to it earlier.
Go ahead, Justice Bland, if you had something else you wanted to say.
Well, I'll say, you know, some things are more negotiable than others, because obviously we all have to uphold the Constitution and laws. But the question is, can we honor those Constitution and laws and make things work in the time of an emergency? So, for example, with courts, courts in Texas are open to the public, you know, with some certain rare exceptions. You know, proceedings, court proceedings are open to the public, and anybody can walk in and watch a court hearing. And that's really important for the transparency that we need in government and the accountability to the public that we have. So one question is, when you have Zoom oral arguments, obviously you can't let every citizen in the state of Texas into a Zoom meeting. And we know some of the problems with security that these kinds of meetings can have. And so, you know, so how do you solve that? Well, you know, what we did is, and what other trial courts and courts across our state are doing is broadcasting the hearings on a YouTube channel. So any member of the public can watch a court hearing going on via video, just like they could go inside a courtroom and watch it. So that's a workaround. It's not like it's not being present in the courtroom. But some things are not as negotiable. And so the question is, when we get to the point of an inordinate delay, how do we handle jury trials, for example? Because juries are 12 people usually, and that's more than 10. And when you add witnesses and lawyers and all that, it's, a lot more than 10. I used to say, it takes a lot of people to put on a trial. I used to be a trial judge, and you had to have witnesses, lawyers, me, the court reporter, the jurors, and so it's like almost being the conductor of a symphony. So those are challenges that we're going to face. And with respect to specific local ordinances, orders, and state executive orders, well, one of the ways that the executive branch or a local government is accountable is through the courts. So if there are challenges to those orders, the breadth of those orders, the scope of those orders, or that they're not in compliance with the emergency powers that people have, then people can and have, challenge those in court. And because we might get court challenges about those kinds of orders, we can't really comment about them extrajudicially, but that's sort of the remedy, right? Is to challenge it if it's not comporting with the law, even in the law in terms of what we can do during an emergency.
Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and, there's Kira. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Kira and let her have a question. All right. Welcome, Kira.
Hello. Thank you guys for meeting with us today. My question is, I guess, has any thought been given to how virtual hearings, like we're moving to, are going to have an effect on the actual outcomes of hearings, especially for those of individuals of like lower socioeconomic status?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Kara. It's, I think there are several different kinds of impacts. For example, one of my friends is a district judge out in West Texas, and where, they have very few lawyers in some of the counties out around in the Alpine, Marfa area, just east of y'all. And, he was saying he thinks this is going to be a game changer for access to justice in, the more rural parts of our state, because it's so much easier for people to get to hearings. They don't have to travel long distances and wait a long time to get into court. And so I think, it can be a very positive thing from that perspective. But also you've got to be sure that people have access to, the Wi-Fi or broadband or Ethernet to be able to get into the court in the first place. And so one of the things that the Texas Office of Court Administration has been doing, and the Access to Justice Commission, is coming up with checklists and guidelines for people who may not have the resources as far as being able to come in through a video live stream. Can you do it by phone? Are there other ways you can do it? And providing like a checklist and that can be provided and shared with people who may have challenges logging in the way that we are today, so that there are other options for them, because we've got it. That's so important for access to the courts in this new virtual world. But it is, the courts, one of my colleagues who's a district judge was saying, they get multiple new court cases every week. And so if they're just sitting at home doing nothing during this time, that's another disaster that's going to come when the courts open back up and they're so far behind in terms of keeping up with the cases. So it's really vital that we do have this way of continuing to conduct our business and deliver justice safely using technology, but we don't want to leave anybody behind when we do it. And so it is something that's very important and something that I think is actually going to help in the long run, but it's something we need to be sure that we're addressing, and we are working to address as we're going through it, to be sure that everybody has the access that they need.
Thank you.
Yeah, one thing to consider is when we talk about access to justice, and Kara, you mentioned people in the lower income levels, that really the biggest barrier to access is money. And we see that from the beginning to the end. If it's a couple that wants to adopt a child, it costs a ton of money to do that. If you want to get a divorce, it costs money. And so there are a lot of ways to try to address that we've all been working on, the Access to Justice Commission and so on. One of the ways we've really been trying to address that is through technology. And so one of the liaison assignments I've had since I joined the court is with what's called the Judicial Commission, the Judicial Committee on Information Technology, JCIT. And so just in the time I've been on the court, we've implemented this statewide electronic filing of all pleadings in the courts, as well as electronic access to all pleadings. So if a case got filed in El Paso County yesterday, I don't have to call up and get a legal assistant in El Paso to go down to the courthouse and get me a copy of it. I just click a couple buttons on my computer and I've got it right in front of me. So we've seen that technology can actually help. Now there are limits if you've got people without broadband or adequate internet and so on. Where was it I saw that the school district had fitted their buses with high-powered Wi-Fi networks and are now sending their buses into neighborhoods to provide free Wi-Fi for their students so they can continue online education. So there are creative solutions to that. I'm of the view that technology is going to help promote access to justice, not hurt it. And I think we've already seen that in the last 10 or 15 years of the work we've done with all the electronic developments that we've been able to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Will now. Hello, Will.
Hi, good afternoon, and good afternoon, Your Honors. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. This is a treat. First and foremost, I hope you and your families are staying safe and well amid the COVID-19 pandemic. My question has to do with going to law school. I'm interested in becoming a judge myself, and I'm University of Texas, so Justice Bland, your neck of the woods, and I believe I read in Justice Busby, I believe your biography said you were an adjunct professor there?
Yes, that's right.
Any advice any three of you could give for someone who wants to go down the same path you guys did and become a judge, whether it be clerking at a particular level of court or anything we can do to help prepare for that kind of a career?
Justice Bland, do you want to start on that?
Why don't you go ahead?
Sure.
And then
Well, I think, you know, I have a parent who's an attorney, so I sort of grew up knowing about that as a career path. But you know, one of the things that is helpful, obviously, is to you know, engage in a course like this, and so you've already made a decision to learn some about this area in college, which I think is fantastic. And you know, then you'll want to investigate the different options for law school and apply you know, to different levels of schools, and also look for ones that, you know, have programs that you might be of particular interest in as far as areas of the law. Although I'll say that when I was in law school, I thought I was going to be a tax lawyer, which is what my mom does. Now then I became an appellate lawyer and an appellate judge, because after law school, I ended up doing clerkships and discovering that I really loved appellate work. So, you know, some of this stuff you can plan, and some you just have to put yourself in a place to be able to try out a lot of different areas of law and see which one suits you. And, you know, I think, you know, then once you get into law school, obviously taking a range of courses and having an opportunity to try out different areas of law that way. And I always recommend in law school, if you can, during your first summer, go intern for a judge. I did that my first summer. I worked for a judge up in New York on the federal district court, and I felt like it gave me a real leg up. Coming into the second year, to have had an experience of working for a judge that first summer. We all take summer interns first or second summer of law school, and also during the year for people, but that's usually for people locally here in Austin. But during the summer, we take them from all over. And so it's a great way to get a feel for the court system while you're still in law school, and a different perspective. And then clerking obviously changed my career and my life, so I highly recommend it. And I also met my wife as a law clerk at the U.S. Supreme Court. She was clerking the same year, so it was changed my life both personally and professionally. I don't guarantee that for everybody, but it was a wonderful professional experience for me, and totally changed my practice area and brought me to where I am today. So I highly recommend clerking. Depends on which court you clerk for, sort of depends on what you want to do. If you want to have more of a trial litigation practice, you might want to think more about a district level court, and or a court like ours, or like a federal appellate court. Certainly, if you're more interested in appellate work, an appellate court clerkship would make more sense. But I think it's, again, a great experience and gives you a leg up in law practice to have a clerking experience if you can. But if not, it's a big financial sacrifice for people, and a lot of people have loans they need to pay off, and they need to go into practice and start making money right away. And so there are other ways to get the kind of experience that will make you a great lawyer early on, other than clerking. And what I have always advised the students that I've mentored is, look for the firm that's going to give you the best early experience in whatever it is whatever area of law you want to practice, and where the people there are really going to invest in your career and be your mentors and push for opportunities for you to get those kinds of practice experience. Because, it used to be, when my mom was in practice, although my mom was the only woman to graduate in her law school class from St. Mary's in 1971. And so when she first started practicing, she couldn't find a job at all, which was a big challenge for her. And the way she overcame that was to find a mentor who helped her get into the practice of trust and estates law eventually. But it's still true today in terms of finding mentors. You want people who are going to be able to get that best early experience for you, because, unlike some people years ago who would go to a firm and stay there for their whole career, some people still do that, but it's a much smaller percentage. And if you're going to end up moving around in your career over time, the thing that's going to differentiate you from other people in the legal profession of your vintage out of law school is how much experience do you have in that field. And so if you've been at a place that's giving you more oral arguments, more trial time, more deal experience, whatever area of practice you're in, you're going to stand out and you're going to know more than your colleagues. And so those are a few thoughts you might think about.
Well, I'm gonna add a little bit here. Not that I can really add more concrete advice, but I just have to tell you a story because of the way you presented your question. When I decided to go to law school, I had been out of college for 5 years and was a youth pastor here in Austin for a church here in Austin. And I have no lawyers in my family. No, I'm not even sure why I decided to go to law school, honestly, but it was a bit of a whim. And when I was thinking about it, I only knew 2 lawyers, and they were both parents of kids in my youth group at the church. And so I called the one that I knew the best. He was kind of the older, more senior attorney. And I asked him if we could have lunch, and we went to have lunch. And I said, well, I'm thinking about going to law school. And he said, why would you want to do that? And I said, well, I think I want to be a judge. And he said, okay, first off, Jeff, you don't go to law school because you want to become a judge. Maybe you'll become a judge one day, maybe you won't, but if that's why you're going to law school, you're making the wrong choice. You go to law school because you want a law degree. Now, that may help you be a better youth pastor. It may help you be a better business person. It may help you be a good lawyer. You can do a lot of things with a law degree, but please don't go to law school just because you want to be a judge. Well, 25 years later, he called me when he read that Governor Perry had appointed me to the court, and he said, okay, I take all that back. But there's some truth to that, I think. When you guys end up in law school, what you're going to notice pretty quickly is it's the people that have all their lives known they wanted to be a lawyer like their uncle or their daddy or whatever, and that just has to be what their future is to be this high-powered, important lawyer. They're miserable in law school because the pressure is so great in law school. And it is the great equalizer. You can come to law school with a government degree or a political science degree or a music degree or in my case, Bible degree. I mean, it doesn't matter. And you can come with a 3.5 or a 4 point whatever. And that doesn't guarantee your success. What guarantees your success is that if you're interested in it and you work really, really, really hard and you do everything you can to do your very best. And that's all you can do. And so I encourage you, on the one hand, like me, don't forget that you want to be a judge someday. But on the other hand, don't let that become so important that it makes you miserable while you're in the process of getting there. Enjoy being a law student. Enjoy being a baby lawyer. Enjoy, and find ways to really enjoy what you're doing in the hopes that maybe one day that'll happen. Because you're going to be miserable for the next 25 years if you don't.
Thank you very much again for your time, and again, best wishes to you and your family.
Thank you, Will. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Michael Martin. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Professor Curry.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank the justices for doing this today. Like Will said, it's definitely a treat. My question is regarding the technology that we're using and that you're using for your trials, Zoom. The New York Attorney General opened up an investigation on them on privacy and security grounds, and I was wondering what your thoughts on how that can influence your cases that you're using in this medium. I know the FBI and NASA also prohibited Zoom's use, and then Google's also instructed all of its employees not to use this platform for those reasons.
This came up at our Collaborative Council Mental Health Commission meeting last week, and some trial courts are experimenting with other platforms for the reasons that you've expressed about online security. But of course, with any kind of technology, there's risk involved. And there's risk involved with court confidences and confidentiality. Even if we were all here, even if we were in our regular conference room, we allow our law clerks and lawyers to all participate, and we're all bound by the Code of Judicial Conduct, including our staff, to not reveal confidences. So we took measures with argument yesterday, especially given that it was going to be broadcast to the public. But no technology is foolproof. Our Office of Court Administration is reasonably sure that when we are having a conference, that they've locked it down. Now, is that a guarantee? No, we know all the time that hackers and people that want to ransom off technology can do things. And I think obviously Zoom was never intended for the use that it's getting right now. It was a really bit of a nascent, as I understand it, platform. I have a daughter who's a electrical engineering, computer science senior, and she gave me a long kind of expository. I won't go into it with you about how Zoom came to be and other kinds of technologies. It's interesting. She's not going to be a lawyer, she says. So, but I'm really proud of her, obviously, since I'm bragging about her to all of you all. But anyway, I think her answer is what my answer would be, which is that technology is not perfect. Security is not perfect. We don't live in a perfect world. We are in a time of extraordinary need to meet challenges, and it's a tool that we're using. And, obviously, hopefully we won't have the problems that you've talked about, and those are going to get, resolved one way or another along the way. But for now, it's what we're doing, but it's not what all courts in Texas are doing. I think head of our Office of Court Administration had said, and I'm sure the number's much higher now, but as of a couple of weeks ago, there were 800 judges with Zoom licenses. But I know Tarrant County in Fort Worth is experimenting with a version of video platform that's offered through Microsoft Teams. And so there's others out there. And I think, that's the great thing about experimentation, just like there are hopefully scientists all around the world working right now in ways that we can't to try to come up with a cure to the COVID-19. There's a million different ideas about, ways to treat the disease, or the ways to vaccinate against the disease and prevent it. And, we're going to let all these great people think about it, and something's going to percolate up, hopefully, as a solution that will work. And so I'm hopeful and optimistic. And I'm hopeful and optimistic we're not going to get bombed during this class session. Although some of you might say, well, that's fun. We were part of a Zoom fail.
All right, thank you, Michael. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Valerie right now. Oh, or mute Valerie accidentally. Hello,
okay.
Valerie.
Hello. So my question is, I wanted to ask what steps would need to take place to increase vote by mail here in Texas, and what legal impediments already exist within the state?
And I will say that I'm not asking to weigh in any policy-wise area, but just what the law exists now.
Yeah, as you know, I mean, Valerie, you wouldn't ask the question if you weren't aware of what a hot topic it is right now. And really, it's not even just vote by mail, but, in our state bar election, we vote electronically for our president of the state bar every year. This is another, sorry, my phone started ringing here. Hey, Brett, can you pick up here?
Sure. Yeah, well, I think that this is going to be an issue that's going to be litigated for sure. And so, there are going to be court challenges on this, so we can't speak to anything that would come before the court. But, I know they had this issue in Wisconsin with some elections that they held just earlier this week. And so, there are existing laws in Texas as far as vote by mail, and that may be something that's within the governor, that falls within the governor's emergency powers as far as being able to suspend laws. I haven't looked at that and don't know the answer to that. But that's certainly something that, and there may be federal election laws on the subject as well, but that's not something that I didn't practice in that area. And typically those kinds of cases go to federal court. So that's not something that we usually see in our court, but certainly it's going to be something that all the states are going to be having to think about from a policy perspective of, if there are still, concerns about social distancing and group size and that kind of thing come November, how are we all going to deal with that? And that's an issue for our elected branches to look at as far as the governor and the legislature to decide, are our laws adequate to deal with that now? And if not, do we need to make exceptions? And then the courts will be there to decide, whatever solutions people come up with, are those consistent with our laws? Justice Bland, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to that.
No. So I think that COVID-19, it's one of those things that people that study decision-making call a black swan event, which is, most swans are white, almost if you go to the park and you see a swan, they're mostly white, but we know, the famous opera and ballet, and we know that every once in a while there's a black swan, and it's an event that is unpredictable. It was not predicted, and at least to the degree that it happens, and it's earth-shaking. And so it'll be a game changer in a lot of areas. And it's too soon to know exactly how it will change things, but you all are young enough that you're going to see for decades what comes. I'm trying to think how old you all were in 2001 or 2020. So you probably you were one, so you don't remember September 11th. That's the last event I can think of that affected society so broadly. as this has. So we'll see. There'll be some great things that come out of it. There'll be some other things that may not be so great, but the good thing is that we will get through it.
Thanks for letting me step away. I'm sorry I had to do that, but Valerie, what I was going to say is was his name Michael Martin? Has he left us now?
Yeah, he just turned his video off.
Yeah, he had the question a minute ago about, are we concerned about security with Zoom? There he is. And really, it's kind of that same issue on voting by mail or voting electronically. And it's a cost-benefit analysis that you have to go through. Do you run the risk when you make voting electronically or voting by mail widely available to all voters? Do you create too great a risk or not? And that's a balancing policy choice. One of the beautiful things about being a judge is we're not allowed to weigh in on policy choices. So, obviously nothing I'm saying indicates how I would rule in a case if something came to me on, say, the constitutionality of that kind of a question. But I think the question that you ask raises an important question that we're going to have to decide going forward. If we can trust the security of the internet or the mail system to handle court oral arguments and conferences, to what extent is it time to consider further whether we can trust it to handle the election process? On the other hand, the election process and the security of the election process is so fundamental to our democracy that there's some really important considerations that have to go into that. So I don't know whether this is going to end up promoting that. I mean, if we get through this next month or so and then have a nice summer and then have a resurgence of the coronavirus coming back for a second wave in the fall, like they say it might do, and we all find ourselves quarantined in November when we're all supposed to be going to the polls on a national level, like you saw in Wisconsin this week, and the challenges they faced, I think we're going to have bigger discussions about that. So I don't know. I don't know how to predict that, but I think it's an important question that you raised.
I want to include a question for myself, and my students have heard me talk about this a lot, but I'm curious why the Texas Supreme Court and justices on the Texas Supreme Court are so engaged in social media with things like Twitter and the adoption of Zoom and the adoption of YouTube so quickly, when other courts aren't. Other state high courts simply aren't as engaged. And I'm curious what you all might think is the reason for that.
Well, we're inherently cool.
Speak for yourself. I'm told all the time I'm not cool.
I've got twin daughters who are 28 and a son who's 27, and they would beg to differ. Trust me. But I think those are two different questions, two different phenomena. One is why are we so engaged on social media, and the other is why are we so quick to jump into some of the new technologies like Zoom or electronic filing and electronic access to court records. The social media, I'll just tell you from personal experience, has almost everything to do with the fact that we have to run for election to be a judge in Texas. And on our court, that's every 6 years. And so, I mean, I'm not telling you guys anything new to tell you that if you have to run for election, particularly statewide election, we're on every ballot in the state, and you're not on social media, you're committing what our former colleague Don Willett used to call political malpractice, if you're not trying to engage in some way on social media when you're having to run for office like we do. So I think that has a lot to do with why we're so active on it. Some of us, some of them it's very natural for, some of us, we'd probably not be on it at all if we didn't have to run for office. And then there are others that would be on it even if they didn't have to run for office because they really enjoy it. Justice Willett, who I mentioned earlier, our colleague who was known as the Twitter laureate of Texas. He had become nationally famous for his Twitter account. As soon as he got appointed to a federal court where he no longer has to run for office, he's never tweeted again. And so I think that kind of gives you some indication of what social media is for us. I think that puts us in a position maybe where we're a little more appreciative of emerging technologies. And so maybe that makes us a little bit more literate when it comes to technology and more willing to try new things like Zoom or promoting electronic filing and access. But we're not doing that because we're not doing Zoom because we run for election. We're doing Zoom because we've got cases that need to be argued and we're not allowed to leave our house. So we've got to find some way to do it. The US Supreme Court decided they could do it by just canceling all the arguments and deciding cases, I guess, without argument at all. The Fifth Circuit has decided they're going to exchange written questions and answers with lawyers instead of oral argument. Maybe it's because of all the work we've done on technology for the last 15 years or so. We're a little more comfortable trying something new.
I'll just say about the Fifth Circuit, yesterday, Justice Busby the lawyers are asking questions, and he described it, equated it to where y'all in college, can appreciate it, an open book exam that's gone badly wrong or something like that. Which I thought was very apt, because if you're the lawyer getting your question from the Fifth Circuit, and so you have 24 hours to answer this question, have at it. Anyway, so yeah, I think courts are handling it differently. An active presence on social media presents other kinds of challenges that we all have to work through, which, for example, somebody reaches out to you on social media and unknowingly they're a party to a case, or so there's always a balance that you're trying to strike in being approachable to voters because you have to run for office, yet being sure that you follow all the rules that judges need to follow in person. You follow those same rules with respect to social media.
And that's very important. Also say, I think social media has been critical during the COVID pandemic, because it gives us a great way to get information out about the emergency actions that we're taking to try to help the court system continue to function. And so, it's a great way to get the news out about things like, things have been, you can now notarize documents through an online process. You can now, the things that we were talking about earlier about not being able to evict people and, having a pause in debt collection and that sort of thing. Just getting that word out all over the state is a challenge. And so being able to share about that on social media is very helpful during this time. And it's been amazing, how engaged, even more now that we're having to stay home, people are, hungry for information and looking for ways to continue to engage with folks. So it's been a great tool to be able to share some resources that may be helpful to folks that way.
I think we're going to take probably one more question, and I'll let you make some closing remarks. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute Alberto here. There we go. Welcome.
Hello, hi. Your Honor, I have a question. What changed about your thought process as you transitioned from being an attorney to a judge?
Justice Bland, I guess you've served as a judge longer than any of us, although you had a short little return to private practice last year and then back to the court. So you've most recently experienced that, maybe. Do you want to take your first shot?
Well, Justice Boyd is saying is I lost election in 2018 as part of a big sweep in the judiciary. And so I went back to private practice. It turned out to be for a hot minute because now I'm back on the Texas Supreme Court. And it was probably good for me because I'd been a judge for more than 20 years. So I got a good sense of what challenges lawyers face, Alberto. And I would say the thinking isn't so different. The critical thinking skills and listening skills that you need to be a good lawyer are the same to be a good judge. And that willingness to be a lifelong learner, because lawyers and judges are often confronted with information and problems that their clients have that they have never seen before on topics they may have never encountered. So being a lifelong learner is really good. The difference when you are a lawyer is you try to step into the shoes of your client and understand the problem from your client's perspective, and then develop a strategy for convincing others, persuading others that this dispute that your client's in should be resolved in your client's favor. And it's an advocacy role. When you're a judge, it's different. As a trial court judge, you have each side, one side argues, the other side argues, and then as the trial judge, you make the decision. And it is really much more of what does the law say about this issue? Everybody's presented me with some facts. The juries maybe told me who they believe because the juries made findings about the facts and found for one side or the other. And then how do I apply the law to those facts? Given everybody's best arguments, what's the best path forward under the law that's written? And so it's less of an advocacy role and more of a analyzing the facts at hand to the law that's presented to you through the lawyers. And so it just changes your perspective. You're no longer stepping into the shoes of a client, but you're stepping into the shoes of the law and how that law should be applied at the facts at hand. And the reason I mentioned trial judge versus now as an appellate judge, another critical skill for lawyering is being able to work on a team. And appellate court judges work all together. The three of us work together with our 6 colleagues to address, really complicated problems and challenges. And, the best thing about it is that nobody sees everything exactly the same way, and everybody catches a nuance that maybe I hadn't thought of. And to get that perspective in reaching a decision, that's why there's 9 of us on the Texas Supreme Court, 9 people on the U.S. Supreme Court, so that you have the wisdom of crowds to apply to the legal challenge.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
So to give you all time to sort of wrap up, and I would again like to extend my large thank you for the 3 of you to take time out of your busy and chaotic schedules, as I am certain they are now, for taking time to speak with my class. Is there anything that the 3 of you would like to say before we, I suppose, before the bell rings and we go home?
Well, let me just add my thanks to you, Professor Curry, for setting this up. We are very disappointed we didn't get to come to El Paso. We travel twice a year. We hear oral arguments in our courtroom in Austin throughout the year, but once in the spring and once in the fall, we want to go someplace where there's a law school or a university where people who wouldn't normally get to see us do oral arguments in person can do it. And we always love it because we spend that morning having our oral arguments, and then we normally have a lunch with like the professors and donors or whoever that kind of helped us get there. But then we spend that afternoon in classes at whatever law school or college is nearby. And That's always my favorite part of those trips. So what you've done is you've given us the favorite part of the trip here by letting us at least do this much. And I appreciate you doing that. And good luck to all you guys through all this. And when you come down to University of Texas to go to law school, or you go to Texas Tech or Baylor or whatever, and keep us in mind and try and come intern for us. We'll look forward to getting your applications and maybe hope to see you in the future.
I'll just add my thanks to Professor Curry and to all of you for having us join you virtually today. I'm also sorry that we couldn't be there in person, but hope that we'll be able to visit as a court again soon, to come out to El Paso in person. But you always can keep up with us online, and Professor Curry can give you the link for the case that we just heard, so that you can listen to it, the one that you would have heard us hear oral argument in person in El Paso, if you're interested in listening to that. And the opinion, as they say, a decision is expected by June. So we get, in recent years, we've gotten all of our cases out by the end of June, following the U.S. Supreme Court's practice on that. So you can also watch for a decision. One of the things that we're really proud of and make a point of at our court is not only this recent use of technology, but Justice Boyd alluded to it earlier, that all of our opinions are online, all of the briefs and all the cases are online, all of the oral arguments are online, and they're either they're streamed live and then they're recorded later, so you can watch that. We want to be as transparent as possible about what we're doing and the cases we're deciding, and we don't charge for any of that, unlike the federal courts. So we encourage you to check out our website and you know, familiarize yourself with what's there and what we're up to. And please do reach out if you come to Austin. Come by the building and visit us once we're all visiting each other again. We'll hope to see some of you in person. And thanks again for the opportunity to join you virtually today. Enjoyed it.
Hang in there. I know this is not how you expected to spend your spring semester in college, and it's not fun. And this is a poor substitute for being with Professor Curry and not being able to spend time with friends and extended family and anybody outside of your bubble. I have two children, the senior and then another one who's a second-year med student. And you know, my daughter says day, whatever the day is, and the Bland family hasn't lost its cool. So I know it can be hard and there can be challenges when you're cooped up like you guys are. So, you know, if you have somebody in your bubble, be sure to hug them and let them know you appreciate them, even if they're driving you crazy and asking you questions about how to operate Zoom. And then if not, you know, find somebody at least to do a walk with outside 6 feet away, because you know, the way that we get through this is to lean on each other. So take care, hang in there, and hope to see you when there are better times.
Thank you all very much, class. I'll be seeing you next Tuesday, and let's all give the justices a virtual round of applause.
Oh, I thought he would give you a bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
You too.